Ranking every single From Software Souls game. Before we start, I want to say that I love these games. I've been keeping up with the franchise ever since 2014. I have over 500 hours on most of these games since I've been playing them for so long, and I love all of them. My ranking has changed so much throughout the years. These days, my ranking doesn't really change since I've played the game so many times. I know what I like and what I dislike in each game, what I look forward to, and what I value. But at some point, I probably had a complete different ranking. So if my opinion is different than yours, it's completely fine. I probably understand why you have the opinion that you do, because I probably shared it at some point. But I'll try to give my best reasoning of why I have every placement, and I hope you guys enjoy. And last place, I have Demon Souls. I'll be including both the original and the remake since I have played both. I do think the original is slightly better, but really not enough of a difference for me to include two separate lists. They're basically the same game. Now, let me paint you guys a picture. The last time I played a Souls game was in 2016 with Dark Souls 3. Then Demon Souls the remake comes out in 2020. I'm beyond excited to play it. I haven't played a new Souls game in 4 years since I skipped out on Secura because I didn't know it was a Souls game at the time. I played this game all night, but in the end, after I beat it, I was ultimately disappointed when I tried to replay it. Like I said earlier, I replay Souls games like a maniac, and I could not replay this game no matter how much I wanted. Now, I 100% respect Demon Souls for starting my favorite franchise. This game was absolutely brilliant for its time, and even today it has a lot of great ideas, but I just don't think those ideas hold up compared to new Souls games, since these ideas are pushed further in the new FromSoft titles and developed way more. For example, Penetrate and Old King Along are the two boss fights of Demon Souls that I really did enjoy, and they have a formula of most modern From Software boss fights. Demon Souls really went for gimmick boss fights for most of the game, which is fine, but I kinda find the bosses to be forgettable, especially compared to every other Souls game. But unfortunately, boss fights are not the only issue of Demon Souls. Demon Souls also has my least favorite areas in the franchise. Now, are they beautiful and atmospheric wise? Of course, I think they're very stunning. But my problem with them is they're very annoying to get through. The game has almost zero checkpoints. So I don't enjoy exploring the areas. I just feel like I'm trying to get the area over with so I don't have to run through it again, which really ruins exploration for me. But the most disappointing part of this game for me has to be the lore. The ideas in Demon Souls just feel so underdeveloped. The bosses don't have good lore behind them, at least most of them. Some of them do. The NPCs, quest lines are really not that good. The quest lines are so underdeveloped. Even if there are good ones, they're here and there, very far between, not common at all. I can only think of one quest line off the top of my head that I really enjoy. I recently played the original this year. I thought it was better than the remake, but all the complaints that I have still stand, so that's why Demon Souls is last place on this ranking. Number 6, I have Sekiro, and this will probably be the most controversial rating on this list. Now listen, I love Sekiro. I recently played it in 2023, so I got to it a little bit later, but I definitely enjoyed my time with it. I just don't think it has the Souls elements that I really like. For example, the storytelling, the atmosphere, and the level design really isn't my thing. That I just have a good time with it, yeah, but it's not really what I look for in Souls games. That does kind of hold it back for me. It doesn't make me want to replay it as much as the other games do, because build variety is one of my favorite aspects of Soul games, trying to take on bosses in different ways. But for Secura, I feel like I'm always doing the same thing, which again isn't a bad thing, but it just doesn't really fit my preference. One thing that especially sucks is that I definitely see the potential in this game. I just really wish this game got a DLC of some sort, because even though I love the combat, I could argue it has the best combat in any Souls game, or even any game. The combat is so addicting. When you get used to it, it looks so flashy. I just love fighting bosses in this game. But I feel like the boss cast of the game is pretty small. It has the smallest main boss cast in the Souls franchise, with only like 13 bosses if I remember right. Obviously has more mini bosses, but I don't think the mini bosses create the same level of spectacle as main bosses do. Most of them are either pretty easy or reused multiple times, or just straight up like a boring obstacle you have to get through. I really find most of the mini bosses super engaging. Of course, there's some diamonds in the rough, but overall, I just don't think the mini bosses are anything crazy. I think the main bosses are excellent. Almost every Sekiro main boss is really good. I just wish we got more main bosses. It just sucks that we have such an amazing combat system, but we don't get to fully utilize it with more bosses. Like sure, Ishin and Sword Ishin, Father Owl, Genichiro, some of my favorite fights in the Souls franchise. But outside of them, there isn't really too many fights that I rank highly, and I think a DLC could have really changed that, because the combat of this game is just so good, man. I just needed more boss fights for me. So the only reason Secura is this low on my list is I wish it had more boss fights. I don't know if people hold the same critique as mine, but that's one thing that always bothered me. I should have more boss fights, and the gameplay loop, the level design, all those just don't match my preference. I can't really put it higher. I come back to this game the least amount compared to everything else above it, but I still do come back to it often because I do enjoy the game. Number 5, you have Dark Souls 2. Now, Dark Souls 2 is a very weird game because you have people that obviously love this game, but the mass majority of people think it's one of the weaker Souls games. Now, a lot of people still like it, but they have it lower on the list. I personally love this game. It was my first Souls game in 2014. I come back to it almost every single year. I play it multiple times. It's interchangeable with the next placement on this list, but recently played both these games and I prefer the other one slightly over it. But Dark Souls 2 is still an amazing game. Now, does it have flaws? Yes. Obviously, I just don't think ADP should have been a stat. I do believe people over-exaggerate that a bit, since leveling up in Dark Souls 2 is significantly easier than every other Souls game, and it's pretty cheap to get to a solid level for your ADP before even finishing the first area. So I don't really get that complaint too much. I understand some degree. I do agree that should not have been a stat, but I don't think it's game changing or does it ruin the game. I don't think so. It is very easy to level up in Dark Souls 2. Now, my major critique with Dark Souls 2 is the FAG system. I just don't like the FAG system. I think it's not good for you to lose a bit of your health every time you die. It really does feel like you're just punishing the player for dying, and you can't take your time learning the bosses and the areas. Like for me, it killed exploration on my first playthrough because I didn't want to explore some optional area and die and run out of FAGs for a boss fight. Then I wouldn't have my full health, so that kind of did ruin it for me. But besides that, there isn't really much to complain about. Like obviously the heal speed is really whack. That's really unfortunate. But outside of those, I do think there's a lot of good to look at too. I think the art direction of Dark Souls 2 is stunning. My favorite in the Dark Souls trilogy. There's so many different atmospheres this game captures. The 3 DLCs are all amazing, especially the Crown of the Ivory King and the Crown of the Old Iron King. Those two are so good. Fume Knight is still one of the best bosses in the franchise for me. He would be in my top 20. Absolutely adore his fight. Power stancing, an amazing feature to this game, man. Like I don't know if you would have power stancing in Elden Ring if it wasn't for this game, and that is one of my favorite things in Elden Ring. It's one of my favorite things in Dark Souls 2. I absolutely adore that. And oh my god, bonfire aesthetics, one of the best things out of the Souls franchise. I don't know why they haven't brought it back ever since Dark Souls 2, but bonfire aesthetics were amazing. Now, I understand why some people don't like Dark Souls 2, but not only is it a childhood game for me, it's a game that, to this day, I still really enjoy, so I can't put it any lower. Number 4, I have Dark Souls 1. Now, I absolutely adore Dark Souls 1. If I was basing this list solely off my first playthrough, Dark Souls 1 would be way higher on this list. Could even be top 1. I'd probably have a top 2. Dark Souls 1 had the best exploration in Souls for me for years until Elden Ring came out. I always came back to this game, explored every single part of it. I don't know how to describe it, but the atmosphere and the feel that Dark Souls 1 gives me just feels really, really nostalgic. Even though it wasn't one of my first Souls games, I played it in 2017. I still really feel nostalgic when I go back to it. It's probably one of the most nostalgic games ever for me. I don't even know why it just has that feel to it. Now, I'm sure there are over 1,000 videos talking about the interconnectivity of Dark Souls 1, so I'm not going to get into that. I don't want to bore you. Obviously, it's amazing. It's super dope how it all leads back to Firelink Shrine. Amazing. I don't want to go into that. You guys know. I do believe the second half of Dark Souls 1 is honestly overhated. Do I think it's as good as the first half? Absolutely not. But I still think it's really, really good. The Grand Archives are an amazing area. The Crystal Cave is a bit of a downgrade, but the Grand Archives themselves are really nice. The Kill of the First Flame is one, if not the best final walk to a boss ever. This place is just awesome. And Artorias of the Abyss is this in the second half of this game, and people need to keep that in mind. Artorias of the Abyss has easily the best bosses in Dark Souls 1 stacked in it. You could argue the best 3 bosses in all of Dark Souls 1 come from Artorias of the Abyss. Now, I personally wouldn't argue that, but you could definitely make that argument. Even someone like Sanctuary Guardian, who's definitely not top 5 in Dark Souls 1, is a really solid fight and better than almost all base game fights of Dark Souls 1. So I just really don't get the hate for the second half of Dark Souls 1. Do I think it's a downgrade, like I said? Yes, but it's still very excellent. This game's not perfect, but to me, it will always hold a special place in my heart, and I come back to it very often. Number 3, I have Bloodborne, and man, what a game. This game is a genuine masterpiece. From this point on, I want to say all of these games are in my top 10. Number 2 and 3 are actually interchangeable with each other. I'm pretty confident in my 1, but even with my number 1, I could see why someone would have Bloodborne or the number 2 spot above it. But for now, this is my ranking, so let's get into it. Now, when I think about Bloodborne, the first thing I think about is the atmosphere. This game absolutely has one of the best atmospheres in gaming, and definitely the best atmosphere in all of Souls. Even though I do believe there's one other game that could argue has a better atmosphere, I think Bloodborne is my personal favorite. The exploration of this game is also among the best stuff From Software has to offer. The only games that have better exploration than Bloodborne are Dark Souls 1 and Elden Ring. Outside of those two games, Bloodborne is the game that I try to explore every single area on every playthrough. I'm absolutely addicted to this game. No matter how many times I play it, every area still seems fresh and fun to go through. I can't talk about the good in Bloodborne without talking about Old Hunters. This DLC is a genuine masterpiece. The lore of Bloodborne was always amazing, but this DLC took it to a whole other level. Not only is the lore amazing, it also has 3 of the best boss fights in the entire franchise. It also has a top 5 boss of all time for me with Orphan of Kos. I never get tired of fighting him. Even outside of him, both Maria and Ludwig are insanely impressive. Ludwig having one of the best OSTs and arguably the best OST in the entire franchise. This DLC is just stacked to the brim with quality content. Now you might ask me, why is Bloodborne only 3rd place for you if all you've done is talk about how good it is? And that's because I simply value what the 2 games of Bloodborne do better than what I value in Bloodborne. Now, even though I consider Bloodborne to be one of the best games ever, it does have one flaw that does hold it back to me compared to the other games. I believe the main boss guy of this game is quite weak. I think it does still have some very good boss fights like Gascoigne, Mordor Lagarius, Skyrim being one of the best ever. I believe Moon Presence is very underrated. Vicar Amelia is great, and even Cleric Priest is a very fun fight that I think is pretty underrated. But for every good boss I just mentioned, I believe the game has some annoying fights. Mikolash, Rum, The One Reborn, Nurse, Celestial Emissaries, Living Failures, The Witches of Hemwick. All these guys are bosses that I absolutely do not look forward to, and Queen Yarnum and Chalice are absolutely annoying to get through. And I'm a completionist playthrough, so I like to do as much content as I can each playthrough. I usually do skip on Chalice Dungeons, but outside of that, I do every single thing that I can. And there is a lot of sections in Bloodborne, especially with its bosses, that I don't really look forward to, as opposed to the other games where I mostly enjoy my whole playthrough. And there are some parts of Bloodborne with its boss cast that I don't enjoy, and that's why Bloodborne is only 3rd place for me, even though it is essentially a perfect game. Number 2, I have Dark Souls 3. Man, what an ending. The perfect ending to the perfect trilogy. I absolutely love this game. This was the first game that I fully played through. Dark Souls 2 was my first Souls game, but I didn't play through the DLCs until later down the line. But Dark Souls 3, I played Ring City as it came out, and I played Ashes of Orion only a little after it came out. So I was there for this game. I was incredibly hyped for it. I got to experience Gale and Midir on launch. It was an amazing experience. Now, it's been 8 years since Dark Souls 3 came out, and some people still say that this game still has the best boss cast in the franchise, and even though I don't personally agree with that, that is such a great take. I have 3 Dark Souls 3 bosses in my top 10, and my favorite boss of all time is a Dark Souls 3 boss, and Midir is still my favorite dragon fighter in the franchise, so I value the boss cast of this game incredibly highly. Even if it's not my favorite, it is definitely the second best. Now, even though the boss cast is definitely the best part about this game, I do believe there are some aspects of it that are underrated. For example, the atmosphere of Dark Souls 3 is definitely the second best in the franchise. I love the tone that they tried to go for. It's absolutely amazing. Now, even though Dark Souls 3 is basically my top 5 favorite games of all time, I do think this game does have one major flaw, and that's the exploration and areas. People blame the linearity for this. I don't think the game being linear is necessarily the problem. I do think that's part of it, but I think the main problem is the enemy placement mixed with the linearity. Just going through these areas when there's enemies stacked on top of each other can be really annoying. And the reason I said that is because Bloodborne itself also has pretty linear level design, but it doesn't feel bad. I love the exploration of this game. And even Dark Souls does have some good areas to explore. For example, Ring City is one of my favorite areas in the entire franchise. Just the feel, tone, lore, everything about that area is excellent. Even the ring knights are perfect enemies, super fun enemies to fight, some of the best in the entire franchise. So I do believe that Dark Souls has way more good than bad. This game is obviously very focused on its bosses, and I think it does that well, and that's obviously the main appeal for me. I come back to fight bosses, I don't come back to fight areas, and I think it does a great job at that. It has a good mix of weapons that are fun to use. Overall, it's an amazing game. I could see why some would have it higher, and it's a perfect ending to my favorite trilogy in gaming. And 2 plus 2 equals 4. Number 1 is Elden Ring. I'm sure you could have predicted it by what number 2 was. I love this game. Let me tell you guys a story. 2 days before Elden Ring came out, I was in a party with my friends, and we were always talking about Souls games, how excited we were for Elden Ring. And I talked about how even though I'm excited, I'm very concerned. I don't know if an open world game will work with Souls. I said I want more games like Dark Souls. I wanted a Bloodborne. Those are games I loved. I've been playing them for years. I want another game like that. I don't know if an open world will work. But as soon as this game came out, I stayed up all night playing it. I was so amazed. I love every single second of me playing it. And now it's my most played single player game ever. I have over 1,000 hours on it. And I replayed every Souls game at least once a year. But Elden Ring, I just couldn't put it down. I have replayed this game over 20 times with new builds. I just always want to experiment with the builds in this game. I want to explore every single part of this game. I love every single thing in this game. There is not much flaws that stop me from coming back to this game. The Elden Ring is my perfect Souls game. It has everything that I love in the other Souls games put into one game. It has amazing exploration like Dark Souls 1, the best boss fights in the franchise like Dark Souls 3, amazing atmosphere like Bloodborne, great build variety like Dark Souls 2, and has my favorite gameplay out of all the games. Just the build variety makes me always want to come back to this game, and fighting the bosses just feels so flowy, feels so nice. I love the boss cast in this game. I love the gameplay of this game. The exploration is by far the best. Now, of course, this game does have its flaws. I think the reused bosses can be a bit annoying. I do think it's a bit exaggerated. Compared to the scale of this game, I really don't think the reused bosses are that bad. I'm not really bothered by them. They feel very quick to get through. They're never annoying. And the main bosses definitely make up for it. Like I said, I do believe that Elden Ring has the best bosses in the franchise. I actually thought that before Shadow of the Edtree and Shadow of the Edtree just certified that this game has the best bosses in all of gaming for me. There's 10 bosses that I think are all S tier. Now, not only is the base game of Elden Ring my favorite base game in the franchise, Shadow of the Edtree is also my favorite DLC in the franchise. I absolutely love this DLC. I remember when it came out, I stayed up for 2 days straight just playing it. I made sure to empty out all my plans. I finished all my works. I had the time to do that. I never even got tired once. I played it from start to finish. It was an absolutely amazing experience. 2 bosses in Shadow of the Edtree made my top 5 favorite Souls bosses of all time. I just can never stop talking about how much I love this game. The exploration, the bosses, build ready, everything is the best it has ever been in the Souls franchise for me. And that's why Elden Ring is my favorite Souls games and a top 3 game of all time for me. But this is just my list. Let me know how you guys' list looks. I hope you guys understand where I'm coming from with my picks. Even if you don't agree, I tried my best to explain each placement. But like I said, let me know your list. We can have a discussion in the comments.